situation? Well, the Additional Paternity Leave Regulations 2010 mirror the applicable wording in the Maternity Leave Regulations of 1999. So employees who are made redundant while on additional paternity leave will be entitled to the same preferential treatment as an employee on maternity leave. This preferential treatment gives an employee on additional paternity leave an entitlement to priority as far as suitable alternative employment is concerned in a redundancy situation. Where an appropriate vacancy exists, the employee must be offered the alternative employment under a new contract, and the contract must begin on the day immediately following the day on which his previous contract comes to an end. The new work must be suitable in relation to the employee and appropriate for him to do in the circumstances, and the new contract provision must not be less favourable than those of the previous contract. Where a suitable vacancy exists and the employer fails to offer it to the employee's dismissal will automatically be unfair. However, where the employee rejects the alternative employment or no suitable vacancy exists, the employee is entitled to be dismissed by reason of redundancy. Do keeping in touch days apply to an employee on additional paternity leave? Yes, an employee can work for you under their contract during their additional statutory paternity leave and while in receipt of additional statutory paternity pay for up to 10 days without losing any of their statutory paternity payment for the week in which the work was done. These 10 keeping in touch days are to enable your employee to undertake the odd days of training or to do some occasional work. The employer has no right to demand that such keeping in touch work is done, and the employee has no obligation to do it if requested. Note, it is up to you and your employee to agree how they should be used, but any work on any day, even as little as an hour, will count as a whole keeping in touch day. Can an employer ask for proof to show that there really is a bona fide situation to qualify for additional paternity leave? Well, both ordinary paternity leave and additional paternity leave are self-certifiable. The relevant forms can be downloaded from the HMRC website, and a minimum of 8 weeks notice must be given by the employee. I've listed the various forms that are in use. Self-Cert 3 is becoming a parent, and that's used for ordinary paternity leave. Self-Cert 7 is becoming a parent for additional paternity leave. Self-Cert 4, becoming an adoptive parent for ordinary paternity leave. Self-Cert 8, becoming an adoptive parent for additional paternity leave. Self-Cert 5 is when adopting from abroad, if applying for ordinary paternity leave. And Self-Cert 9 is when adopting from abroad, if applying for additional paternity leave. Self-Cert 10 is in the tragic circumstances when the mother of the baby or the adopter dies, in which case the same form is used for both sets of paternity leave. The self-cert documents all include a declaration which is to be signed by the employee and signed declaration from the mother or the adopter. And the employee declaration states that I will care for the child during the the paternity leave period. I am the child's father, or I am the mother's spouse or partner or civil partner, including same-sex relationship. I have or I expect to have the main responsibility, apart from the mother, for the upbringing of the child. And in the case of adoption, it will say I am jointly adopting the child with my spouse or partner, including same-sex relationship. Or it might say I am the spouse, civil partner of an overseas adopter. The child's mother or the adopter that has taken adoption leave must also sign a declaration, and their declaration states their name, address, including postcode, and national insurance number. The fact that they were entitled to statutory maternity pay, maternity allowance, or statutory adoption pay. That they have given notice of their intention to return to work, and the date they intend to return to work to their employer. the start date of their maternity allowance or maternity payment or statutory adoption pay period, and confirming that this is the only application for additional statutory paternity payment for this particular child. They then have to consent to the employer processing the information given in the declaration. However, in the case of additional paternity leave, an employer can ask for additional proof within 28 days of receiving that initial request form. And the proof that they would ask for is a copy of the child's birth certificate or adoption matching certificate, the name and business address of the mother's employer, and authorization to seek confirmation of her return to work. If you ask for this information and the employee must give it to you within 28 days, or they may not be able to take their leave. Once you have received a request for additional paternity leave and or pay, including any additional evidence as requested above, you must then write to the employee within 28 days telling them the date when their leave and pay will start and end. Can an employee opt to take their ordinary paternity leave and then their additional paternity leave consecutively? No, the rules on the two types of leave are very, very specific. Ordinary paternity leave must be taken any time up to 8 weeks after the date of birth, or up to 8 weeks after the Sunday of the week the baby was due in the case of a premature baby. Ordinary paternity leave must be taken on the day the child is placed, is actually matched for placing for the adoption, or the day after. Or in fact it can be at a predetermined date after the above, but no later than 8 weeks after the date the child was placed. Additional paternity leave, the earliest start date is 20 weeks after the birth, and it is for a minimum of 2 weeks and a maximum of 26 weeks. However, it must end no later than the child's first birthday. In the case of adoption, the earliest start date is 20 weeks after the date the child is placed, or after the date is actually entered the UK if it's an adoption from abroad. And it must end no later than 12 months after that same date. Note, the exception is if the mother dies. Additional statutory paternity pay and additional paternity leave can start on the date of death. Additional statutory paternity pay must end no later than the date the statutory maternity pay or maternity allowance pay would have ended. So the period of payment runs exactly the same as if the mother had still been alive. So that would be in a very, very tragic circumstance. Additional paternity leave must end within the timescales as already outlined. In order for an employee to take additional paternity leave, the child's mother must have returned to work. It does not matter if she returns to full or part-time work, as long as his statutory payments have stopped and he has returned to work. The employee cannot start additional paternity leave or get any statutory paternity pay if the mother or the adopter is still on a period of annual holiday, sick or parental leave, which directly follows a period of maternity or adoption leave. There has to be a genuine return to work. Right. What are the employee's rights to paternity leave following a stillbirth or the death of an infant under 1 year old? If a baby is stillborn after the 25th week of pregnancy, your employee is entitled to the ordinary paternity leave and ordinary statutory paternity pay, if eligible, that he would have claimed anyway. The 25th week of pregnancy is calculated as being the 16th week before the expected week of confinement. So that the week the baby was due to be born, you go back 16 weeks, and that's the 25th week. If a baby is stillborn prior to the 25th week of pregnancy, then paternity leave and paternity pay do not apply. It's effectively deemed as if it's been a miscarriage. If a baby is born alive, then dies, And even if it only survives for an instant, it is treated as any other normal birth in respect of ordinary paternity leave and ordinary statutory paternity pay. If a child dies or ceases to live with an adopter during ordinary statutory paternity payments, the payment should continue as normal. If a child dies or ceases to live with the adopter during additional paternity leave, the employee can remain on their additional paternity leave for 8 weeks following the end of the week of the occurrence. However, an important point to note is, if a child dies or ceases to live with an adopter during additional statutory paternity payments, the period the employer can only continue paying for the week of the occurrence. So the statutory payment must stop from the start of the next week. So whilst they are eligible to take up to 8 weeks of the leave if they feel they need that time to recover over such a tragic event, they're actually only entitled to 1 week of statutory payment. And now to summarise, a lot of small companies are particularly concerned about how this new legislation will impact on them. However, research from the CIPD has found that less than half of fathers take even the existing 2 weeks ordinary paternity leave at statutory pay levels. So the increase in paid paternity leave is unlikely to be attractive to many fathers. It is still a fact of life that in most families the man is the main breadwinner, so the chances of these families being able to afford to take up the option of him going on to statutory paternity pay are very slim. However, the truth is that going forward, most employers at some point will be asked about paternity rights because a huge proportion of the population will become eligible to take it. Well, I hope you found this webinar interesting and informative. You will be sent via emails copies of the slides. Note that as a result of this legislation, you need to update not only your paternity policy, but also your maternity and adoption policies. Statutory policies can be downloaded from our DocShop on the website, or you can ring Right Hand HR on 0844 630 9140 for bespoke policies. Look out for more webinars from Right Hand HR on the website. Take a look at our website, which outlines our full HR and health and safety service offering. If you have any further questions or to take advantage of our free trial, please contact us on 0844 630 9140.